A quadruple shooting on Bourbon leaves one woman dead and 3 people injured. Here's what we know. Police say 3 women, 1 man were shot around 2:22 this morning.
The story begins in the kind of darkness that doesn't feel like night anymore. The hazy, expectant hours before dawn on Black Friday. Outside the Walmart in Valley Stream, Long Island, a line of shoppers curls around the building like a coiled storm waiting to break. People stomp their feet against the cold, clutching flyers, murmuring about deals, and slowly, steadily, the mood shifts. The quiet becomes a chant. Open the doors. A sound that vibrates against the glass panels and the thin metal frames never meant to hold back that many bodies. Security is minimal. A few temporary barriers, a skeleton staff of overnight workers, and doors designed for regular store traffic. Not a human tidal wave. Inside the entrance, 23-year-old seasonal worker Jeannie Mitai Damour takes his position by the sliding doors. He's 6'5", gentle, soft-spoken, hired for extra muscle during the holiday rush. No one knows it yet, but the next few minutes will turn him into the symbol of everything wrong with Black Friday's frenzy. Around 5:08 in the morning, the countdown begins, not official, not organized, but felt in the shifting weight of hundreds pressing forward. The front panels quiver, metal groans. Workers yell for everyone to step back. They aren't heard. They never had a chance of being heard. And then it happens. A sound like a shotgun blasts the doors, shatter inward. Glass explodes. Hinges rip out. The crowd surges as if pulled by gravity. Bodies leaning, bodies falling, bodies stepping over whatever is underfoot. In that instant, Jdimitai is swallowed. Knocked backward, pinned beneath boots and shopping carts. His bright yellow vest disappearing under the crush. Other workers go down with him. Shoppers trip and fall, only to be trampled by the next wave. The entrance becomes a funnel, a choke point where the sheer force of motion replaces any sense of control. Inside, employees scream for shoppers to stop. Some people freeze, horrified. Others keep pushing forward, focused on televisions and discounted electronics, unaware of or unwilling to process the chaos behind them. It takes minutes for anyone to reach Jdimitai. Minutes in a stampede might as well be an eternity. When paramedics arrive, the scene looks like the aftermath of a structural collapse. Shattered glass everywhere, shoes on the floor with no owners, workers crying, customers yelling. The air feels electric, panicked, unreal. EMTs kneel beside the young worker, performing chest compressions, trying to carve order out of the madness still echoing through the entrance corridor. Staff members help form a makeshift perimeter, pushing crowds back, pleading for space. But the damage is done as the morning sun finally starts to rise over Long Island. Early reports trickle out. Some shoppers allegedly kept pushing forward, even as workers begged them to stop, stepping over the injured to reach discounted goods. Whether out of tunnel vision or disregard, it becomes the most haunting detail of the event. And by sunrise, one truth is clear. What began as a holiday sale has turned into a headline that will change Black Friday safety forever. Case 1 Walmart Stampede in Valley Stream, New York, 2008. By sunrise, the shattered entrance of the Valley Stream Walmart had already become the center of a national debate. News vans parked in rows. Investigators moved in and out of the taped-off vestibule. And Walmart executives arrived quietly through back corridors. What had begun as a holiday sale was now officially a workplace fatality, and the United States federal government wanted answers. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, sent inspectors to Long Island before the store even reopened. Their early assessment was blunt. This tragedy was preventable. OSHA officials documented almost every detail. The flimsy metal framing, the unsecured glass doors, the absence of proper barricades, the lack of trained crowd control personnel. What shocked investigators most was how predictable the surge had been. The store had advertised major doorbuster deals. Shoppers were lining up hours earlier each year. Yet, the defensive measures remained stuck in a pre-Black Friday era, more suited for regular weekend foot traffic than a pre-dawn rush of hundreds pressing simultaneously against a single entrance. The agency soon issued its findings. Walmart had failed to provide a safe workplace. They cited inadequate planning, insufficient staffing, and the absence of any formal system to manage line buildup, pressure waves, or emergency egress. OSHA's language was unusually strong. They described the event as a catastrophic breakdown of basic safety principles. Walmart pushed back at first, arguing that Black Friday crowds were unpredictable and that employees had acted heroically under impossible circumstances. But OSHA countered with case studies from stadiums, festivals, and other retail chains. Crowd surges weren't new. The science behind them wasn't new. And responsibility, OSHA said, rested squarely with the employer who had placed workers at the threshold of danger without tools to manage it. The pressure mounted when Damour's family filed a civil suit, alleging that Walmart's negligence created the conditions that led to the stampede. Corporate statements expressed sympathy, calling Jdimitai a valued employee whose loss was deeply felt. But sympathy without accountability wasn't enough for regulators or the public. Eventually, Walmart agreed to a settlement with OSHA that included a monetary penalty and, more importantly, a nationwide overhaul of store opening procedures. That agreement required comprehensive crowd management plans, numbered wristbands or tickets to prevent surges, staggered customer entry, reinforced doors, trained staff, positioned strategically, police presence for high-traffic locations, and emergency protocols designed to avoid exactly the kind of crush that killed Damour. Retailers across the country took notice. The tragedy became a wake-up call for an entire industry that had allowed Black Friday chaos to grow unchecked for years. Malls and big-box stores began implementing new line systems, designated waiting areas, and earlier openings to reduce mass buildup. For once, the nation confronted the uncomfortable question beneath all the holiday frenzy. How far were people willing to go for a sale, and how prepared were stores to stop them? In the middle of legal filings, media commentary, and corporate negotiations, the person at the center of it all risked becoming an afterthought. Jdimitai Damour wasn't a symbol, or a headline, or a case study to be cited in safety manuals. He was a soft-spoken young man from Haiti, working a temporary job to support his family during the holidays. Friends described him as gentle, warm, and always willing to help co-workers struggling with heavy pallets. His life didn't end in a spotlight. It ended under a stampede fueled by impatience and discount fever. And, as the industry rushed to rewrite its rules, one truth lingered. Black Friday didn't just take someone's breath away. It took a life. Case 2 Toys R Us shooting in Palm Desert, California, 2008. It was supposed to be a family morning, the kind where parents pushed overflowing carts, toddlers argued over action figures, and Christmas lists were whispered excitedly down brightly lit aisles. Inside the Toys R Us in Palm Desert, California.
Breaking news, frightening moments inside a Toys R Us store in Palm Desert. 2 people are shot and killed on one of the busiest shopping days of the year.
For the exits, our Inland Empire Bureau Chief Bob Banfield is live in Palm Desert. About 100.
Black Friday energy buzzed through every corner. Shoppers squeezed past each other with giant stuffed animals, Lego boxes, dollhouses, and discounted electronics balanced on their carts. The air smelled like fresh cardboard and winter jackets warmed by indoor heat. Children darted ahead. Parents called to them over the crowd. It was noisy, chaotic, but innocent holiday chaos the way Americans knew it. Then the tone shifted. Witnesses later said they noticed 2 couples arguing near the front registers. At first, the voices were just sharp, cutting above the ambient hum. A few customers paused, glancing over as the shouting escalated into something more explosive. a heated confrontation that felt out of place in a store decorated with cartoon murals and Christmas banners. Some described it as a dispute that moved fast, heated up faster, and began drawing eyes from every direction. Then came the sound no one expected in a toy store. Gunshots, loud enough to echo off the tall shelves, sharp enough to turn the entire store into a wave of falling bodies and instinctive panic. Shoppers dropped to the floor, pulling children beneath them. Parents grabbed toddlers and ducked behind aisles stacked with board games. Others hid between bicycles and toy kitchens, shielding themselves behind boxes as more shots rang out. A clerk dove behind the customer service counter, pressing a trembling hand over her ears. Near the checkout area, people screamed for help, unsure where the bullets were coming from or whether the gunman was still moving. The store's cheerful background music cut abruptly as staff tried to trigger emergency protocols. A woman clutching a baby ran toward the exit but froze at the sound of another shot, dragging the child into an aisle of stuffed animals. A teenage employee called 9-1-1 from behind a row of Nerf blasters, voice cracking as she tried to describe the chaos through tears. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence felt even louder. Sheriff's deputies arrived within minutes. As they entered the store, weapons drawn, radios crackling, they were met with scenes more fitting of a nightmare than a holiday sale. Abandoned carts scattered across the aisles, toys trampled underfoot, parents crying as they tried to calm their children. Officers moved shoppers out in small groups, telling them to keep their heads down. Near the front of the store, deputies found two men lying motionless on the floor, both victims of the shooting. Outside, customers huddled behind patrol cars, holding their kids tight as sirens wailed through the parking lot. Some children cried. Others asked questions their parents didn't know how to answer. Reporters began arriving before investigators had even finished clearing the building. And then came the first unexpected update, the one that changed how the public understood the entire tragedy. Authorities announced that this did not appear to be a random attack on shoppers. It wasn't a mass shooting motivated by the sale rush. Instead, early information suggested a personal dispute between two couples that somehow spilled into gunfire in one of the most family-centered stores imaginable. But knowing the motive didn't erase what hundreds had witnessed that day. Gunshots cutting through a toy aisle, families scrambling to flee, and a holiday tradition turning into a horrifying reminder of how quickly normalcy can fracture. The bright red Black Friday sale posters still hung inside, as deputies worked a painfully ironic backdrop to a scene marked by fear, confusion, and irreversible loss. Case 2 Toys. Erupts shooting in Palm Desert, California, 2008. In the hours after the chaotic evacuation, as families gathered in clusters outside the Toys R Us parking lot still shaking, investigators began pulling together the pieces. What had initially felt like an unthinkable public attack inside a children's store slowly emerged as something far more targeted and no less terrifying for those who lived through it. Detectives spoke to witnesses who had seen the argument earlier in the day. Two couples, both already on edge, had entered the store separately, but their paths crossed in a moment thick with tension. Shoppers described seeing hostile glances, raised voices, and a confrontation that escalated with alarming speed. What no one knew then, what investigators would later confirm, was that the parties involved had a history with each other. This wasn't random. It wasn't strangers fighting over a parking spot or a discounted toy. It was a personal feud that ignited at the worst possible moment in the worst possible place. As officers moved through the aisles, securing the building and comforting shaken employees, evidence of panic remained everywhere. Overturned carts, toys scattered across glossy floors, a child's jacket abandoned near the registers. In the middle of that surreal scene lay the bodies of the two men involved in the dispute, now covered with white sheets as forensic teams placed numbered markers around spent shell casings. Almost immediately, the Riverside County Sheriff's Department addressed the public. They made it clear there was no active shooter, No bystanders had been deliberately targeted, and the violence stemmed from an altercation between the two couples. For law enforcement, this distinction mattered, but for the dozens of families trapped inside during the gunfire, the reassurance did little to calm the lingering fear. Many parents said the same thing. Once shots ring out in a crowded store, motive doesn't change the terror. As details emerged, Toys R Us corporate released a statement expressing heartbreak over the tragedy. They pledged cooperation with investigators and support for the shaken employees who had watched a children's holiday shopping rush transform into a crime scene in seconds. Candlelight vigils formed that evening near the parking lot, with local families bringing teddy bears and flowers despite not knowing the victims personally. The store's holiday wreaths and sale banners were still visible behind fluttering police tape, an image that made the news across the country. Community leaders questioned whether big box stores needed stronger Black Friday security, even for events that weren't tied to sales frenzy or crowd surges. The gunfire at Toys R Us forced a broader conversation. How prepared were retail spaces for sudden interpersonal violence? And how could families feel safe returning to a place designed for children? National media leaned into the unsettling symbolism. A toy store, a place meant for joy, innocence, and holiday excitement, now had bullet holes in its checkout area. Commentators called it one of the darkest Black Friday chapters, not because of stampedes or panic buying, but because the violence shattered the illusion that family spaces were immune to the unpredictability of human conflict. By the time investigators finished their reconstruction, they had a clearer picture of the lethal encounter between the two men, but the emotional fallout remained with every parent who knelt, shielding their children behind colorful aisles of dolls and action figures, later telling reporters that they would never forget the sound of gunfire echoing through a store built for joy. A day meant for bargains had instead left a community carrying the memory of terror, and a brightly lit toy store wrapped in crime scene tape became the haunting symbol of a Black Friday no one would ever forget. Case 3. Pepper spray attack for a gaming console Porter Ranch. Los Angeles, 2011. Black Friday at the Walmart in Porter Ranch always began the same way: bright lights, long lines, and the restless thrum of hundreds waiting for the plastic to come off the season's hottest electronics. But on this night, the atmosphere had an extra charge. The store had advertised a limited batch of deeply discounted gaming consoles, shrink-wrapped on a pallet in the center of the electronics section. Shoppers clustered around it shoulder to shoulder, hands on carts, eyes locked on the stack, like runners waiting for a starting gun. Employees moved through with walkie-talkies, reminding people to stay calm, to wait for the countdown, to keep aisles open. But the closer it got to 10 p.m., the louder the chatter became. Kids pointing at boxes, teens planning strategy, adults calculating how quickly they'd have to move. The crowd pressed tighter. Anticipation thickened into tension. When the final minute arrived, the store seemed to hold its breath. Then, an associate stepped forward, box cutter in hand, slicing the shrink wrap with a practiced arc. It was the signal everyone had been waiting for. The crowd surged. Carts knocked into ankles, elbows lifted instinctively, and voices rose into a chaotic mix of excitement and alarm. And then came something no one expected. Witnesses later described seeing a woman near the front of the pack reach into her purse. Before anyone grasped what was happening, a sharp hiss sliced through the noise. A fine, burning mist sprayed across faces and clothing, drifting through the electronics aisle in a fast-spreading cloud. Some initially thought it was a malfunctioning aerosol can or a dropped cosmetic. But within seconds, the truth hit the air, burned, throats tightened, and shoppers began coughing violently. Children cried as parents yanked them backward. Adults dropped to their knees, hands clutching their eyes. Others stumbled blindly into displays, trying to escape the chemical sting. The wave of distress moved faster than the crowd could react. What had been a stampede toward discounted consoles became a scramble to get away from the invisible haze drifting above the polished floor. The pallet itself was overrun in the confusion. Boxes were dragged away, stepped on, or abandoned as people rushed for cleaner air. An aisle that moments earlier had been packed with hopeful shoppers now echoed with chaotic instructions. Move back. Get the kids out. Call someone. Employees hurried to shepherd families toward the front of the store, while others tried to locate the source of the spray. But the suspect, described by several witnesses as a woman in a hoodie holding a small canister, slipped away in the confusion. By the time the chemical cloud thinned and the first medics arrived, she was nowhere to be found. Outside, the parking lot filled with blinking ambulance lights. Emergency responders flushed eyes with water, checked breathing, and reassured shaken parents. Reports later tallied roughly 20, injured, none life-threatening, but all frightening. Several children had trouble catching their breath. Others trembled as the sting slowly faded from their skin. Shoppers gathered in stunned clusters, asking the same question: why would someone do this? The answer, police would later suggest, was as simple as it was shocking to keep others away from the gaming console she wanted. As detectives took statements, a theme appeared again and again. Witnesses said the spray wasn't accidental. It hadn't been a scuffle or a dropped item. It looked intentional, deliberate, controlled, a weapon used to clear a path. Inside, the electronics aisle still bore the marks of the moment: overturned merchandise, footprints on crushed cardboard, and a lingering chemical smell that clung to the air vents. Black Friday had turned the hunt for a bargain into a night people would talk about for years. And as officers reviewed the scene, one quiet, chilling truth settled in. Someone had walked into a crowded store, aimed pepper spray at families, and vanished into the chaos, all for a video game console. The LAPD launched a search. Shoppers checked their phones for videos, and across the country, the story sparked disbelief. A Black Friday that transformed from excitement to panic in the space of a single hiss of aerosol. Case: 3 pepper spray attack for a gaming console, Porter Ranch, Los Angeles, 2011. By sunrise the next morning, the Porter Ranch Walmart looked less like the site of a holiday sale and more like a police staging area. Yellow tape fluttered in the breeze. Patrol cars idled near the entrance, and detectives stepped through the electronics section, taking slow, deliberate photographs of a place that had become national news overnight. The cloud had cleared, the aisles had been swept, but the sting wasn't gone, not from the eyes of those who lived it, and not from the headlines now spreading across the country. LAPD launched its appeal early. Detectives stood before microphones, urging shoppers to come forward with any footage they might have captured. Black Friday crowds always meant cell phone videos, and sure enough, clips began surfacing within hours. Some were blurry, some chaotic, but together they painted a fragmented portrait. A tightly packed crowd, the sudden jerk of bodies recoiling, someone yelling, "Pepper spray," before the screen shook wildly. In a few frames, investigators believed they saw a figure in a hoodie raising an arm toward the crowd the moment the mist dispersed. As analysts slowed down the footage frame by frame, the suspect still wasn't clearly identifiable. But the video, paired with witness accounts, gave detectives a path forward. A woman, mid-30s to 40s, possibly local, carrying a purse that could have held the canister. Officers canvassed nearby parking lots and adjacent stores, hoping someone recognized the image enough to name her. News broadcasts jumped on the story with urgency. Commentators asked what Black Friday had turned into, how an event meant for holiday shopping had escalated into what one expert on crowd behavior called competitive shopping turned violent. Global news covered the unfolding investigation, emphasizing how the event symbolized a broader pattern. Peak consumer pressure mixed with limited stock had created the perfect environment for panic, and in this case, aggression. Shoppers interviewed outside the store spoke with visible fatigue. One mother, still holding her son's hand, said she had spent half the night explaining why someone might spray a chemical inside a crowded building. He kept asking if the woman needed the game that badly, she told reporters. What am I supposed to say to that? Inside Walmart's corporate offices, conversations were already shifting toward prevention. Although no one died, the incident had injured roughly 20 people, a number large enough to force a re-evaluation. Within days, discussions emerged about rethinking doorbuster events entirely. Controlled ticket systems, staggered entry times, pre-sale vouchers, and eventually, the pivot many retailers would make toward online Black Friday deals. The era of massive midnight surges was beginning to fade. Legally, the suspect faced potential charges of assault with a chemical agent, child endangerment, and reckless conduct. Even without a fatality, the act was serious, a deliberate release of irritant spray in a packed room of families and children. Detectives made clear that when the suspect was caught, the case would be treated with the full weight of the law. As tips trickled in, officers entered names into their system, cross-checked faces, and worked through the holiday weekend. Yet the attack had unfolded in seconds, and the suspect had vanished into the after-sale traffic like any other shopper. The trail was challenging, but not impossible. LAPD emphasized that someone, a friend, a co-worker, a relative, had likely heard her brag, panic, or slip up. And when that person came forward, the case would break open. For families who were there, the emotional aftermath lingered. Some said their children refused to walk down store aisles without scanning for exits. Others admitted they had sworn off in-person Black Friday trips entirely. The memory of coughing, tearing eyes, and frantic shouts replaced what should have been a night of early holiday excitement. In the end, the pepper spray suspect became more than a case file. She became a symbol of the moment when shopping pressure crossed a line, when a hunt for a discount left a trail of fear instead of celebration. And as investigators continued their search, one quiet truth echoed through every interview, every surveillance clip, and every shaken witness statement. No one could understand how a video game console was worth hurting 20 people, but someone had believed it was. Case 4: Parking Lot Gunfight at Walmart, Tallahassee, Florida, 2012. It was late on Black Friday night, the kind of hour when the parking lots outside big box stores look like temporary cities' headlights sweeping across rows of cars. Shoppers pushing carts piled with TVs and toys, and engines creeping slowly as drivers hunt for one of the last open spaces. At the Walmart in Tallahassee, Florida, the lot was so packed that cars circled repeatedly, searching for even a sliver of asphalt to claim. According to early reports from Walb News, frustration was rising long before anyone pulled a trigger. Two groups of shoppers spotted the same open space at nearly the same moment. One car angled in, the other tried to slide behind it, and within seconds, doors were opening. People were stepping out, and the argument had begun. Witnesses later told officers they heard yelling sharp, clipped exchanges over who had arrived first and who had the right to the spot on a night when tempers were already stretched thin. What might have been a small dispute on any other evening escalated fast. Shoppers nearby watched voices turn into shoves, the scuffle pushing dangerously close to other vehicles. A few people tried to intervene, calling out for both sides to calm down, but adrenaline was already in control. Then, in a moment, several witnesses described almost the same way. One man stepped back toward his vehicle and reached inside. A gun came out. Another man, on the opposing side of the argument, reacted instantly. Some witnesses believed he feared for his life. Others thought he was simply escalating the conflict. Either way, he drew a firearm too. In the neon glow of the Walmart sign, the parking lot fell silent for a beat, then erupted. Shots cracked across the asphalt. Shoppers holding bags dropped to the ground and ducked behind bumpers. Parents screamed for their children, ushering them between cars or rushing them back into the store's sliding doors. A line of customers waiting to exit reversed direction in panic. One witness said the sound echoed off the building like it was happening inside. When the sirens began to wail, the chaos started to settle. Officers converged on the scene within minutes. 2 men were on the ground, each hit by gunfire, conscious but badly injured. Shell casings glinted on the pavement under the flashing red and blue lights. Police moved quickly to secure the weapons, clear the area, and get paramedics through the crowd that had gathered despite pleas to step back. Shoppers stood in stunned clusters as deputies began marking evidence. No one could quite believe that a fight over a piece of pavement, something as mundane as where to park, had turned into a gunfight in front of families out for post-holiday bargains. Some described seeing sparks as bullets struck metal. Others admitted they had grabbed their kids and sprinted without even looking back. The early question on everyone's mind, and the one that would shape the entire investigation, was simple on the surface, but complicated underneath. Who fired first? And after that, a heavier one. Could any of it be justified as self-defense? Or was this an argument that spiraled into reckless violence with no legal shield at all? Detectives began sorting out witness accounts, surveillance angles, and statements from both wounded men as they were transported for treatment. But in that moment, before the interviews, before the legal framing, before the community backlash that would soon come, the only thing certain was this. On a night defined by crowds, sales, and holiday anticipation, a single parking space had nearly cost multiple people their lives. Case 4 parking lot gunfight at Walmart, Tallahassee, Florida, 2012. By the next morning, the parking lot where it all happened looked almost ordinary again. The carts were back in their corrals. The overnight staff hosed away the streaks on the pavement, and the Black Friday banners still hung over the entrance. But investigators from the Tallahassee Police Department were already deep into the task that would define the days ahead, trying to reconstruct, frame by frame, how a dispute over a parking space erupted into gunfire at one of the busiest Walmarts in Florida. According to World News, detectives began by quietly pulling surveillance footage from every angle the store had: the front entrance, the side loading zone, and the long stretch of parking lanes near where both cars had stopped. Officers also canvassed the lot for cell phone videos, and on a night like Black Friday, there were plenty. The challenge wasn't a lack of evidence. It was that nearly every witness remembered the same event differently. Some said one man shoved first. Others insisted a punch was thrown before anyone reached for a firearm. A few claimed both men were already heated from earlier inside the store. Sorting truth from adrenaline-heavy confusion became the core of the investigation. Meanwhile, both injured men were recovering in the hospital. Officers interviewed them separately, each giving their version of why the situation escalated. One described feeling threatened enough to defend himself. The other insisted he only drew his weapon because the first man had already reached for his. In a state with self-defense laws that allow broad discretion, the distinction mattered, and it would determine whether this would be treated as a mutual fight or a criminal attack. Local media began discussing possible charges. Analysts mentioned aggravated battery, improper exhibition of a firearm, or unlawful discharge of a weapon in public. All of it depended on who fired first, who escalated, and whether either man could reasonably claim fear for his safety. While the police were careful not to draw conclusions, reporters noted investigators were leaning heavily on video footage to settle conflicting accounts. For Tallahassee residents, the case triggered an immediate emotional reaction. The idea that a parking dispute, something every driver has experienced, had nearly turned fatal left many shaken. Community leaders condemned the violence, calling it a dangerous sign of short tempers meeting easy access to weapons on a high-stress night. Others questioned why such arguments escalated so quickly on major shopping days, when crowds, noise, and pressure to find deals all collided. Inside the Walmart, employees who witnessed the panic spoke quietly about ushering families into the store's back areas, locking doors, and calming frightened children who had been moments away from simply heading home with holiday gifts. Parents told local reporters they struggled to explain the incident to their kids, how a simple decision about where to park had turned into something terrifying. Law enforcement issued a public advisory urging patience during major sales weekends, reminding shoppers that no discount, no parking space, and no sense of pride is worth a life. They emphasized de-escalation, conflict avoidance, and stepping away from heated arguments before they spiral. As the investigation continued, one theme took hold across social media, community forums, and local broadcasts. On a night designed to bring people together for bargains and celebration, two men had come within inches of dying, all because neither would yield a parking spot. In a holiday season built on family gatherings and thankfulness, it became the most unsettling reminder yet that Black Friday's chaos doesn't just happen inside the aisles. Sometimes, it starts long before shoppers even reach the doors. Cas 5 early morning killing at Hamilton Mall, Mays Landing, New Jersey, 2016. It was the kind of cold that settles deep into the pavement, the kind that makes shoppers stamp their feet and rub their hands together while waiting for early morning Black Friday deals. Outside Hamilton Mall, in Mays Landing, the sky was still a muted grey blue, the parking lot lit mostly by yellow sodium lamps and the glow of the Macy's sign. Families huddled in coats, teens scrolled through phones, and small groups lingered beside their cars before heading toward the entrance. According to People.com, the atmosphere was typical for a holiday sale. Quiet chatter, long coffee lines, and the soft hum of anticipation. That calm lasted right up until the moment it didn't. Just before sunrise, a burst of gunfire cracked through the lot, sharp, unmistakable, and far too close. Witnesses later said it sounded like 2 quick pops, then several more. Near a parked vehicle close to the Macy's doors, a man collapsed almost immediately, hit multiple times. Another man staggered backward, wounded, clutching his side as shoppers began screaming and scattering in every direction. Panic rippled across the lot. Some people sprinted toward the mall doors, hoping to get inside and away from whatever was happening. Others ducked behind SUVs and concrete pillars, calling out for relatives they had been separated from. Car alarms triggered themselves into a frenzy, adding to the confusion. When officers arrived, they found a grim scene. One victim lying motionless near the passenger side of a sedan, the ground slick with shattered glass. The second victim, injured but conscious, was taken to medical care. Spent shell casings dotted the asphalt, small, metallic evidence of a shooting that had shattered the pre-dawn quiet. Despite the chaos, the mall itself remained open. Tape cordoned off the section of the parking lot where the attack occurred, creating an uneasy divide between the holiday shopping crowds and an active crime scene. Some customers hesitated at the doors, unsure whether to continue inside. Others walked past quickly, shaken but determined to finish their morning plans. Rumors swirled. Social media lit up with panicked posts about a possible gunman roaming the mall, though police moved fast to correct them. Authorities announced there was no active shooter inside, no ongoing threat within any store, but just as importantly, no immediate arrests had been made outside either. That lack of closure turned the quiet lot into a place of both fear and mourning. Reporters noted that the victims appeared to have been standing near their car moments before shots were fired. Whether they had been waiting for someone, talking with each other, or involved in some kind of dispute was still unclear. What remained certain was the simplest, most devastating truth. One man had left home for a Black Friday trip and would never return. As sunrise finally broke over the Hamilton Mall, lighting up the police markers and the taped-off area, the contrast felt surreal. Inside, stores were playing cheerful holiday music, and lines were forming at cash registers. Outside, detectives moved slowly around a parking space that had become a crime scene. The holiday rush briefly paused by a violence that arrived long before dawn, and the question everyone whispered but no one could answer yet hung over the lot like a shadow. Who pulled the trigger? And why? Cas 5 early morning killing, At Hamilton Mall, Mays Landing, New Jersey, 2016. By the time the sun finally rose over Mays Landing, the Hamilton Mall parking lot had turned into a place of grim contrasts, flashing patrol lights on one side, holiday banners fluttering on the other. Detectives worked behind yellow tape while shoppers, still arriving for early sales, slowed their cars and stared at the cluster of cruisers near Macy's. According to People.com, investigators made it clear early on, this was not an active shooter event inside the mall. Instead, it appeared to be a targeted attack that unfolded within seconds beside a parked car. Detectives began their painstaking reconstruction. They marked shell casings, photographed shattered glass, and reviewed surveillance angles from the mall's exterior cameras. The questions came fast. Why that car? Why those two men? And why on the busiest shopping weekend of the year? Police quietly explored possible threads past disputes, personal grudges, even the possibility of gang-related tensions. None of it was confirmed publicly, but the direction of questioning suggested investigators believed the gunman knew exactly whom he was firing at. Meanwhile, family members arrived at the scene and the nearby hospital, their grief amplified by the surreal timing. Black Friday was supposed to be a day of bargains, relatives gathering, and early morning traditions. Instead, it became the day they lost someone. People.com noted how shaken the community felt, a sense that something ordinary had been punctured by sudden violence. Inside the mall, stores tried to continue operating. Shoppers entered with hesitation, glancing repeatedly toward the taped-off section of the lot. Retail employees whispered updates to each other between transactions. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter. Even with official assurances that the mall was safe, the emotional weight was impossible to ignore. Local officials faced immediate pressure to respond. Some emphasized that Hamilton Mall had no history of major violence. Others urged patience, cautioning that speculation could hinder the investigation. Still, public concern grew, especially from people who had been in the lot just minutes before the shots were fired. If something like this could happen during one of the most heavily trafficked retail mornings of the year, what did that say about security at large shopping centers? In the weeks that followed, the case remained mired in uncertainty. Coverage from regional outlets highlighted the frustration many felt. No immediate suspect identified, no arrests announced, and very few details released about motive. Detectives kept working leads quietly, but nothing publicly tied the threads together. Some community members speculated it might remain one of those holiday tragedies that never receives full closure. Years later, anniversary articles revisited the shooting. They described lingering questions whether anyone had ever been definitively held responsible, whether the investigation stalled, or whether certain answers were never meant to reach the public. What remained constant was the emotional scar left behind. And through every retelling, one truth stood above all the speculation. A man who stepped out before dawn for Black Friday never made it back home. A reminder that the promise of a holiday deal turned, in an instant, into a life permanently cut short, leaving a family with an empty seat and a community wondering how such violence found its way into a mall parking lot before sunrise.
Good Monday morning. A man is facing charges today after accidentally shooting himself at Hamilton Place Mall on Saturday afternoon.
Case 6 River Chase Galleria. Thanksgiving night shooting. Hoover, Alabama, 2018. Thanksgiving night at the River Chase Galleria felt like the unofficial beginning of the holiday season. Storefronts glowed with oversized Black Friday signs. Families carried early purchases in glossy bags, and the walkways echoed with overlapping conversations and holiday music. According to BohumWiki.com, the mall was packed, one of the busiest nights of the year, when the atmosphere suddenly shifted from festive to frantic. Near one of the anchor stores, a fight broke out between several young men. At first, most shoppers didn't notice. Noise in a packed mall can blend into the background. But then, witnesses heard a sharp crack, a gunshot followed by another. A teenager fell wounded, and another person nearby was injured as crowds began to scream and scatter. Panic surged through the building in seconds. Shoppers sprinted toward escalators, some taking the stairs 2 at a time. Parents grabbed their children and ducked into stockrooms as employees pulled down security gates. Others ran into parking decks, unsure whether the danger was behind them or ahead. Phones lit up with frantic calls. "There's gunfire. We're hiding. Come pick us up now." Police officers inside the mall moved toward the sound of the shots. Additional units rushed in from outside, sprinting past stunned customers who were still unsure what had happened. Within moments, officers encountered a man running with a firearm visible at his side. Believing he was the shooter, officers fired, killing him instantly. The man was 21-year-old Emantic E.J. Bradford Jr. The mall fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the sounds of sirens echoing through the atrium. Officers secured hallways, while medics treated the wounded teenager and other injured shoppers. For those still hiding behind counters or in back offices, updates filtered in slowly, first whispers, then police announcements, then breaking news alerts. In the early hours after the shooting, officials issued a statement identifying Bradford as the suspected gunman. News outlets repeated it, and social media amplified it. Images of the mall filled national broadcasts. Families at home watched the story unfold without yet knowing the most important detail. The first identification was wrong. Detectives began reviewing camera footage, interviewing witnesses, and comparing accounts. The timeline didn't add up. The movements didn't match, and the shell casings pointed to a different shooter entirely. As investigators dug deeper, the truth emerged. Within days, authorities announced that Bradford was not the shooter. The real suspect, the one who wounded the teenager, had fled the scene. Source: bamwiki.com. The revelation rewired the narrative instantly. What began as a Black Friday shooting inside a crowded mall had become something more complicated. A case involving panic, split-second decisions, and a tragic misidentification. Shoppers who had been inside that night recalled the moment officers moved through the crowd, the fear on people's faces, the confusion about who was helping, who was running, and who was simply trying to escape. For Bradford's family, the news was devastating. They learned that their son, who loved anime, gaming, and fashion, had gone to the mall for holiday shopping and never made it home, not because of the initial gunman, but because officers mistook him for the threat. And the cliffhanger that closed those first chaotic days, the real shooter was still out there. Case 6, River Chase Galleria. Thanksgiving night shooting, Hoover, Alabama, 2018. Morning arrived over Hoover with a kind of heaviness that did not match the usual post-Thanksgiving rush. News crews lined the perimeter of the River Chase Galleria. Microphones pointed toward a mall that looked ordinary from the outside, but carried the weight of a national story within its walls. Overnight, the narrative had changed in a way no family ever wants to hear. The man police shot, Emantic E.J. Bradford Jr., was not the gunman who wounded the teenager. According to bamwiki.com, that revelation sparked immediate outrage. Bradford's family, joined by civil rights groups, demanded answers. Witnesses had already told reporters they saw Bradford either running away, like everyone else, or attempting to help others escape. Now, with investigators publicly confirming he was not responsible for the initial gunfire, protests formed outside city buildings and in front of the mall. Signs read, "Justice for EJ," and "Do not rush to judgment." Chants echoed across parking lots that just hours earlier had been filled with holiday shoppers. Behind the scenes, detectives continued their original task, locating the person who fired the first shots that wounded the teenager. Within weeks, another man was arrested and later convicted for the initial shooting, finally separating Bradford from the act that had led officers to confront him. bamwiki.com. But for Bradford's family, that development brought little relief. it only sharpened the central wound. EJ had been declared the suspect before all the facts were known. State investigators reviewed the officer's actions. Their legal analysis concluded that, under their interpretation of state law and the rapidly unfolding circumstances, the shooting was justified, a decision that immediately ignited further debate. Community leaders questioned how an armed bystander in a state where open carry is legal could be mistaken so quickly for a threat. Protesters marched through shopping districts. Faith organizations held forums. Calls for changes to training protocols and identification procedures gained strength. The discussion widened beyond Hoover. News outlets framed it as a story about the split-second judgments officers must make in crowded public spaces, especially in states where civilians may lawfully carry firearms. Experts debated whether those environments create a near-impossible task, distinguishing a fleeing victim from a fleeing aggressor in the span of a heartbeat. Advocacy groups pointed to the tragedy as evidence that policy around open carry, emergency response, and mall security desperately needed reform. Meanwhile, inside the Bradford home, the holidays were marked not by family gatherings, but by grief. EJ's parents spoke softly in interviews about a son who loved video games, fashion, and spending time with friends. They described the difficulty of watching early news reports label him a threat, only to have investigators reverse that claim days later. The emotional toll remained immense, a family forced into the national spotlight because of a misidentification made in the most chaotic moment possible. Community memorials at the mall featured candles arranged beneath the escalators where shoppers had fled. Some mourners left handwritten notes about fear, misjudgment, and the importance of not letting the tragedy fade into statistics. Others wrote about the teenager who survived the initial shooting, hoping the recovery would mark at least one point of light in an otherwise devastating night. And as the mall returned to its holiday rhythm, wreaths lit, music playing, discounts advertised, the memory of what happened lingered. A reminder not just of gunfire in a crowded shopping center, but of a young man who went to the mall on Thanksgiving night and never came home, caught in a moment of confusion and fear that changed everything. The family still waits for a world where the truth would have been seen quickly enough to save him.
Overnight, 21 people ended up getting shot in a popular nightlife area in Birmingham, Alabama. This is an area on the 2000.
Cass, 7 Oxford Circus. Panic during Black Friday. London, United Kingdom, 2017. It was supposed to be one of the brightest shopping afternoons of the year. Oxford Street was glowing under millions of Christmas lights, the air filled with music drifting out of storefront speakers, and sidewalks jammed with people carrying bags from every direction. According to Wikipedia, the underground station at Oxford Circus, one of the busiest in Europe, was pulsing with the usual Black Friday energy. Tourists, commuters, families, teenagers, weaving between displays and deals. Nothing suggested what was about to unfold. Just after rush hour began to swell, a sudden commotion broke out near the underground escalators. Witnesses later described hearing shouting. Some thought it was a fight. Others believed they heard something that sounded like bangs. Within seconds, those fragments of noise turned into a chilling rumor that evaporated all logic. Shots fired at Oxford Circus. Panic spread faster than any official message could. Inside the station, passengers abandoned luggage and ran up stairwells. On the street, people sprinted in every direction, some tripping, others pushed to the ground as crowds surged. Shoppers ducked behind bins, barricaded themselves inside clothing stores, or rushed into alleyways. Taxi drivers leaned on their horns trying to clear space as waves of frightened people flooded the roadway. Videos captured parents pulling their children through crowds, their faces tight with fear. And online, the panic exploded even faster. Social media posts claiming an active shooter multiplied within minutes. Photos and shaky clips of fleeing crowds were shared thousands of times. People checking their phones saw only fragments. Armed police, shots fired, chaos at Oxford Circus, and many assumed the worst. The city's busiest retail district had suddenly turned into a maze of confusion, with no one sure what was real. Armed officers arrived in full gear, sprinting toward the station with weapons drawn. Trained for the gravest scenarios, they moved through platforms and tunnels as panicked commuters pressed against the walls. Stores across the area pulled down metal shutters. Staff whispered instructions to customers, hiding in storerooms, waiting for updates that weren't coming. For more than an hour, central London held its breath, trapped between rumor and possibility. Then came the pivotal reversal. After an exhaustive search inside the station, along the tracks, and across nearby streets, officers found no evidence of gunfire, no shell casings, no weapon, no attacker. According to Wikipedia, investigators eventually concluded that the entire emergency had been triggered by a misunderstanding, possibly an argument or a loud noise that escalated into mass panic once amplified by the crowd and social media. Even with the all clear announced, the emotional aftershock remained. Images captured the surreal aftermath. Piles of abandoned shopping bags scattered across pavements, people embracing each other, trembling, families reunited in tears, and tourists sitting on the curb, heads in their hands, trying to process the terror they had just felt. Many described hearing nothing themselves, only seeing the fear on others' faces and trusting their instincts to run. That afternoon became a stark reminder that danger doesn't need to be real to cause real harm. Several people were injured in the crush, treated for leg wounds, falls, and severe panic attacks. Others spoke later about the moment they thought they were in the middle of a terror attack, a fear Londoners knew all too well from recent years. In the end, Oxford Circus returned to its glittering holiday pace. The lights switched back on, music resumed, and the crowds slowly reformed. But beneath that surface, the memory lingered. A single spark of confusion had turned one of the world's busiest shopping streets into a scene of pure fear. Even without a shooter, the panic was real, and for thousands caught in the stampede, that was more than enough. Case 8 Chicago Nordstrom domestic shooting, Illinois, United States, 2014. The Friday after Thanksgiving should have been a celebration of Chicago's winter glow holiday lights, strung across Michigan Avenue, crowds weaving between decorated storefronts, and the River North Nordstrom pulsing with its usual Black Friday rhythm. According to ABC7 San Francisco, the second floor was especially busy that evening. Shoppers carrying armfuls of sweaters, staff managing long returns lines, and music playing softly over the hum of conversation. It was the kind of night when people were tired, but cheerful, and a seasonal worker could almost forget how long her shift had been. Shortly after dusk, witnesses saw a man step off the escalator and walk directly toward that worker, a young woman stationed near a display of holiday accessories. Some shoppers noticed the tension immediately. His posture tight, his eyes locked on her body language shifting from polite professionalism to clear discomfort. A few feet away, customers browsing scarves heard raised voices, sharp enough to cut through the background music. Then, in the space of a breath, the argument shattered into violence. Multiple shoppers reported hearing 2 or 3 loud blasts. People screamed and dropped to the floor, knocking over racks as they crawled behind counters. Others sprinted toward the closest exit, abandoning shopping bags as the store erupted into chaos. Security guards shouted instructions, guiding clusters of frightened customers down emergency stairwells, while some employees herded people into fitting rooms and locked the doors, whispering for them to stay quiet. Within minutes, police officers and medics rushed inside. According to ABC7 San Francisco, they found the woman critically wounded and the man fatally injured from what investigators believe to be a self-inflicted gunshot. Stretchers maneuvered between mannequins dressed in winter coats, the bright holiday displays forming a jarring backdrop to the emergency unfolding on the polished store floor. Paramedics worked swiftly before transporting the woman to a nearby hospital. while officers cordoned off the entire level. Authorities soon clarified their early findings. This was not a random attack on shoppers. It was domestic-related, a tragedy rooted in a relationship, not a broader threat to the public. But the distinction offered little comfort to those who had fled with their hearts pounding. People outside the store spoke of the dread that surged through them as they heard the shots, unsure whether something even larger was taking place. Some had taken shelter inside neighboring shops. Others pressed themselves against the glass of nearby buildings, watching flashing lights reflect across the sidewalks. Inside Nordstrom, the once busy second floor had transformed into a silent crime scene. Police taped off sections of carpet, collected shell casings, and interviewed shaken witnesses who could barely recall the order of events. Employees still huddled in break rooms were escorted out one by one, many trembling as they stepped into the cold night air. Families arriving for evening shopping watched in confusion as officers blocked the entrance. The festive displays visible behind the doors but unreachable. Law enforcement officials later emphasized that other customers had not been targeted, but the emotional shock spread far beyond the two people involved. Holiday shopping is supposed to be predictable, colorful, crowded, sometimes stressful, yet always safe. Instead, those present found themselves caught in the middle of something deeply personal and overwhelmingly violent. The emotional kicker hung over the scene long after the area was cleared. Outside, holiday windows continued to glow, reflecting ornaments and winter scenes onto the busy street. But inside, the second floor of a beloved department store held the weight of a life-altering moment, a shift that began like any other seasonal shift and ended in fear, heartbreak, and an unforgettable rupture in the middle of Black Friday's glittering night.
All right, these guys just robbed, I don't know. Oh, they robbed Nordstrom. Here they go. They're just running. I've always wanted to see this in real life. What do you think they're gonna go at them?
I don't know. It's super exciting. I feel like a real Chicago one.
That's a stolen car for sure. Here's another guy that they stole.
Case 9 Kohl's parking lot struggle in Romeoville, Illinois, United States. 2013, Thanksgiving night in Romeoville carried the familiar shift into the holiday rush, a cold breeze sweeping across the Kohl's parking lot. Shoppers hurrying toward glowing doors as Black Friday deals officially began. According to NBC Chicago, officers were already patrolling the area, aware that the first hours of the shopping weekend often came with crowds, tempers, and the occasional theft attempt. Inside the store, the atmosphere was festive and slightly frantic. Outside, headlights cut across the pavement as families searched for parking spots, unaware that a very different kind of scramble was about to unfold. Shortly after nightfall, loss prevention staff alerted police about a possible retail theft attempt in progress. Officers moved toward the entrance as two suspects exited. One man suddenly bolted, sprinting across the asphalt toward a waiting car. A patrol officer lunged to stop him, reaching the vehicle just as the door swung open. In the chaos of seconds, the officer became caught between the door and the frame. When the driver hit the accelerator, the officer was dragged across the pavement. Shoppers nearby froze at the sound of tires screeching. Some shouted warnings, others ducked behind their vehicles, unsure whether more danger was coming. The dragged officer clung to the door, unable to free himself as the car picked up speed. According to NBC Chicago, another officer on scene saw what was happening. A colleague being pulled across the lot by a fleeing suspect and made a split-second decision. A single gunshot cracked through the night, echoing off the storefronts. The round, fired to stop the accelerating vehicle, brought a new wave of confusion as drivers slammed their brakes and pedestrians rushed back toward the building. Inside the store, some shoppers thought something had collapsed. Others assumed the noise came from the street. Few knew that on the other side of the sliding doors, an officer was fighting to stay alive. Moments later, the fleeing vehicle came to a stop. Officers swarmed in, pulling the injured officer clear and taking the suspects into custody. According to NBC Chicago, paramedics treated the officer at the scene before transporting him to a hospital, where he was later reported to be in stable condition. The driver, along with the suspected shoplifter, was detained and questioned as detectives cordoned off the area, with yellow tape stretching across the parking lot entrance. The investigation moved quickly. Prosecutors charged the driver with attempted murder, citing the extreme danger created when he accelerated with an officer trapped in the door. The alleged shoplifter faced charges of retail theft, and additional counts were discussed as the case moved through early hearings. The community reacted with a mixture of anger and exhaustion, frustration that a routine store theft could escalate into an incident involving gunfire and a nearly fatal injury. The image of the Kohl's parking lot in the aftermath lingered long after the sirens faded. Cars sat abandoned at odd angles, some with doors still open. A line of shoppers, who had intended to start their holiday spending, stood against the side of the building giving statements to officers. Store employees, many of them teenagers working seasonal shifts, watched from behind makeshift barriers, still shaken by the sudden eruption of violence. What struck many, according to follow-up reporting, was how thin the line can be between petty theft and something far more dangerous. A moment designed for deals and discounted gifts had become a scene of flashing lights, medical bags, and police radios crackling across the lot. A single decision to run, to drive, to accelerate, turned a simple shoplifting attempt into a life-threatening confrontation. And as the emotional kicker, on a night meant for holiday spirits and family traditions, the community was reminded that the rush for bargains sometimes hides far deeper desperation. Frontline workers and officers, out there to keep the peace, often find themselves facing the sharp edge of that desperation, even before the sun rises on Black Friday.